Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not sure that is on. There we go.
You're on.
I, along with so many of my colleagues, share great compassion for anyone who feels diminishment or discrimination. And I believe that all people should be treated with dignity and respect, and they should be treated equally. This is a constitutional guarantee. And here in the United States, women have fought hard for equal treatment. The Equality Act, as drafted, undermines the fight by putting women in danger and taking away the right of women to feel safe in women-only spaces like domestic violence shelters and prisons. It should be obvious why we don't want men to have open access to women-only shelters, but let's get a few examples on the record. In Alaska, the city of Anchorage passed their own version of the Equality Act, and a women's shelter was investigated by the State Equal Rights Commission after the shelter turned away a transgender woman. In the end, they were vindicated by a court ruling recognizing their status as a faith-based nonprofit. But imagine how it must have felt for the vulnerable women in that shelter to watch as investigators weaponized these new standards against what should have been a safe haven. A shelter in California went in the opposite direction and chose to ignore abuse by a transgender man against a group of women rather than risk a complaint. I've been speaking with representatives from shelters in Tennessee, and they're extremely concerned about how the Equality Act would affect their ability not only to protect women, but to support them mentally and emotionally. They only want to do what they do best, which is helping to make women feel safe and protected. Now, society doesn't look upon incarcerated women with the same sympathy as it does abused women. But I would assert that when it comes to safety, it shouldn't matter if those women are in shelters or in prisons. Women serving sentences for crimes they committed should not be put into situations where they cannot escape and made victims to other crimes. Women's safety is fundamental to the fight for women's rights. So why, I would ask my colleagues, would they push so hard for a regressive, repressive piece of legislation that walks back women's rights and endangers women's lives? Women should never have to fear for their safety because they're forced to share spaces with men. I would urge my colleagues to take a step back and ask themselves why they believe that forcing vulnerable women into these dangerous situations would somehow represent a step in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Blackburn. We have 3 guests from the House, and I'd like to ask Senator Whitehouse to introduce the first congressman.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's a great pleasure for me to have the